Hello, I'm Randy Purcell. I'm the guy that transfers ink from magazines onto a thin layer of beeswax, and I welcome you today. Thanks for coming on and watching. Today's demonstration is going to be of me creating a couple of my bee paintings. So if you want to follow along, you'll see after this quick introduction that I'm going to talk a little bit about the materials, the process, and then I'll go into actually creating these guys. And parts of the process I'm going to speed up, so it's not a 4-hour or 3-hour video. Instead, it's only going to be about 30 minutes. So hope you enjoy. Please give me some feedback. If you enjoy this video, please like and share, follow along, and I'll be sharing some more here in the near future. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon. Hey everybody, here we go. We're gonna go through the process of transferring ink from these magazine pages onto this thin layer of beeswax. And I'm showing you today one of my small bee paintings. I'm going to do two of them side by side, a 3-inch square, and then this is a 5-inch panel. Going to play with the colors. I'm thinking about doing these two as mirror images so that they're the same colors. You know, I just randomly choose colors in some of these bees. Sometimes it's a little more thought out, but these I'm just going to kind of do like this, where I just play with some different variations of colors so you can see that. You can see the textures that you can create by using either text or patterns from things in the magazine pages. And of course on small paintings like this, I like to have those in there, but it's more important on larger paintings just to keep it interesting. I don't want just a color field. I want something more intriguing that draws a viewer in. So that's why when you look at my paintings, for the most part, you'll see these random images from the magazines incorporated with the colors. So there's your quick introduction. And I'm not going to show this today, but you can find videos on my YouTube channel of applying the beeswax. And as you can see here, wax has been applied to this panel. And let's see if I can get a good shot there. I've gotten pretty good about knowing when I pull my brush out of the crock pot with the wax on it, how fast to go. And this one hasn't even been scraped smooth yet, and I could use that one right off the bat. It's got one groove down the middle from the brush, but I could scrape that smooth, and I'll show you how that's done. I like to use one of these ceramic scrapers. You see some potters, ceramic workers, hand building, whatever. They use these to scrape the clay smooth. It works just as well on wax. And we'll basically just drag it across the surface of the wax and pull a little bit off at a time. This is the best tool that I've found to get the surface smooth. Now I have played with some other options. The other options could be these wire loop tools. Same thing used for clay work. You can get wider ones, and the wider ones are better. Of course, when you're pulling with this across the wax, you're likely to make some grooves if it's a smaller one. So get a wider one. I should have had one of those ready to show. And then we can always use the trusty old razor blade, which is really cool. And they actually make an encaustic scraper that looks like this. I just happen to have one. This will work fine. I've found that I gouge into the wax too easily with this, and then it makes this annoying noise. On smaller panels, it's fine. But boy, that gets, yeah, that's makes my dog turn his head. Okay, so there's your options. like I said, razor blade, I've used that for many years before I ran across this just metal scraper, just thin metal. I like that. Alright, so once you have gotten your panels smooth, I use a template. Template's very simple, black and white image printed on just regular paper. I did this at home. You can, if you're doing larger pieces and you want to print the image, what I do is take it to Kinko's, FedEx Kinko's, and they'll print it on their, it's called an engineering printer, engineer printer. Yeah, it's basically the same weight paper, black and white image. You don't need color in this instance because all it is going to be something that you put down, cut up, and replace with the magazine paper. But you can also draw. I've done that. So just get a white sheet of paper, and if you want to draw your composition, that's another option. I did that early on before I realized I could use a template to speed things up. But yeah, you're welcome to draw your composition just as well. So what I do is I sit the paper on top of the wax after it's been smooth, flip it over, and basically just cut that shape to hold it in place. Once I've done that, then I'm at the same step here. So now we would just take our panel, and I like to do this a little bit beforehand. It helps hold the paper in place. I'm just barely cutting through the paper with my knife the shapes of the pieces I want to replace. So for instance, I want to take this one hexagon out and replace it with some color. I'm just going to choose some from my pile over here. I'm going to cut the same shape. I don't know if you noticed, what I did was when I pull this off of my template, I flip it over and I put it face down on the color. I just, which way does it go? Don't you love it? Okay, flip it over and put it face down on the color that you want to transfer, because you want the color to be face down on the wax. So you're basically just flipping that template over so you can replace it, but the back side that's going to go up, the color goes face down. Toss the piece from the template, try to figure out which way it's supposed to go in here. There we go. And then once it's in place, I take the back end of my knife, just kind of push it down, hold it in place. I don't have to do that a lot, just enough to where it doesn't move easily. And then I'll repeat that process, and I'll show a video of me going through that. But yeah, that's the basic of getting started. Okay. We've talked about, you know, getting our wax smooth, using our template, getting that first piece. So what I like to do beforehand, just to save time, especially since I'm doing a video recording, I want to go through my boxes or my magazine pages and pick out the colors I want to use and just lay them out in front of myself so I can quickly move through the process. A lot of times that's where you spend so much time, is looking for colors you want to use. If you do it beforehand, it saves you a little time. And since I'm doing some pretty random colors in this one, similar to this, I'm just going to lay out, you know, some oranges, some reds, some browns, and then I'll have, of course, the yellows and the dark browns and the blacks for the bee, because it'll be on top. I'm thinking about doing the wings a little bit different on these others. what I've been doing with wings, just they're so small, and to get details in them, it's almost easier to just put one solid color and then carve out the lighter areas. But I'm not loving it, so I may try something different. We'll see. But as you see, I'm just going to choose some things I think are interesting. And it's always good to find text. And you notice I like to rip the pages so that where I've cut out before, it doesn't snag on things. So and then those smaller pieces that I'm not going to use, I can go ahead and recycle those. There's a good blue. So yeah, depending on what the painting is going to be of, will depend on my color palette. This is no different reaching in your acrylic drawer, pulling out colors for a painting. Just choosing things that I feel are interesting and will fit with the composition I'm doing. And as I've said before, you don't want to just choose various colors, because if I used all flat, just solid areas of color, it'd get really boring. So like for some of the yellowish tones, I'll use some of this architectural stuff or some text to mix in with that, just to add some interest to the piece. And it's so easy to find these solid colors. Like I said, smaller paintings, a little harder to get some of that detail in because the pieces are so much smaller, especially on this guy. You're not going to get a ton of interest in a small piece. That's why it's more fun to work big. Okay, there's some, I like areas like this. It has the color I want plus some contrasting colors of blue. Alright, that ought to be good. Got a variety of colors here, you can see, and more than likely as I'm going through this, I'm going to choose some other ones too. Alright, so I'm going to interrupt here, just do a little voiceover during the sped up process. Save you a little from being bored of me sitting there cutting this panel up. So I'm just cutting out the template, basically the lines, the shapes that I want to cut out and replace with the magazine paper. Now that I've got all that done, I am taking my knife and pulling up each little piece of paper in the shapes that I've already cut, and then going to my magazine paper and cutting those shapes to replace on the actual panel for the painting. And we'll slow back down here so you can see in real, oh, no, we're going in fast time. Okay, so I thought we were slowing down. We're still going fast. Yeah, so I'm taking off a piece of the template, and I basically lay it face down on top of the colors I want to transfer. So when I pick up that magazine page that's the color I want, it goes back in that same location, face down on the beeswax, which is our goal here, is to put the colors on the beeswax so we can remove the paper later, which will hold that ink in place. The paper will be removed and we'll have a nice little ink transfer. But as I'm cutting on larger paintings, sometimes I'm going back to magazines or my boxes of colors. I don't always just stick with that palette of colors I had laid out in front of me. It just depends on what I run into as I'm working on one. I may have a different direction at the last minute that I want to go. So I keep myself open for opportunities to change my mind. And the great thing is, when I do change my mind, I don't know the results until the painting's done. As you can see, I can't tell where the colors are going, or can't remember necessarily where the colors are going on each piece I cut. Kind of a blind study. Here we go. We're slowing down so you can see in real time me remove a piece, and I'll flip it over and put it on top of the colors I want to transfer, textures. Cut that same shape using that piece of paper as a template. And then I'll toss the piece that's a template and put the one that I want to transfer on the beeswax in that spot it came out of. Burnish it lightly so it'll hold in place, and do another one. And I tend to jump around on a composition. I don't work in one area usually for very long. I don't know if it's I just get bored, or if I want to make sure that since I can't keep up with the different colors and textures I'm putting on the panel, if I move things around a lot and make sure I'm like sharing specific colors in different areas of this composition, it seems to be more cohesive without me having to plan it. I hope that made sense. I put a lot of variety in there so that it works well together. Going back and forth from the larger piece to the smaller piece. And what's funny is that smaller bee painting is a 3-inch square, and it takes almost the same amount of time as me doing the larger piece, which is 5 inches. Going smaller is not necessarily easier. Sometimes it can be harder if I'm trying to get good details. And depending on the subject, sometimes I'll simplify the image a bit so I can paint it smaller. But it's hard to paint smaller, get details in there, and make it interesting. That's where I think choosing the colors and the textures from a magazine page really come into play. It's important to choose things that have something interesting and that plays well with the other things that you choose. Alright, so all the magazine pages have been cut into place, and if you can see now where I burnished it with the end of my knife before, now I have a wood block that I use. And this wood block, I've been using it for 12 years now at least. So it's got a lot of ink residue on it from where I've rubbed across so many paintings. But I'm basically trying to set that magazine paper into the beeswax. We're on top of it very flat, where there's no air pockets. Because anywhere you have air pockets, if I sand that and spray it with water and any of that is not touching the wax well, it's not going to transfer color. So you got to make sure that it's really set into the wax well. And when I'm sanding the paper, I'm also paying attention to that, the sanding, that buildup of heat. Now you can see the ink on my block. So yeah, I usually rub over it, make sure. And you got to be careful too that you don't have any overlap in your paper, because when you're sanding, it's easy to get the edge of your sandpaper into the or underneath your magazine paper. So it's a good time when you're burnishing to make sure that you don't have any edges that are sticking up. You take your X-Acto knife and kind of correct that problem. And the sanding, I'm sanding with, I usually use a 220 grit sandpaper. I have used 150 grit. It's probably a little faster, but it's also easy to sand too much with the 150 grit. And I'm just sanding enough to knock the sheen off. And in my case, I've got a pretty good feel, so I usually go to the point where all the color is removed from the back side of the magazine paper. So I'm down to the paper of the magazine page. The ink's being removed. And what this does is it allows that paper to absorb water, which is our goal. It absorbs the water and it turns to a pulp, and I can rub it off without disturbing the ink on the other side. Close. Larger paintings, this can become a heck of a task. It looks easy on these small ones, but on large paintings, it'll wear on you. I've got some blisters to prove it. So I'll usually take a rag and spray it with some water and just kind of wipe the top of the piece off, get the dust out of my work area, and contaminate everything. And now that it's kind of cleaned up a little bit, I'll just spray directly onto the panel with my spray bottle. If you don't have a spray bottle, you could always just pour water on it. The idea is to get it wet enough where water is almost puddled up on top of the panel. That allows there to be enough water to soak into the paper easily. And I usually like to take my finger and just, I'm not really pushing hard, I'm just more or less moving the water around on top of the paper. There you go, so you can see that it's wet. I like it wet enough where it's almost dripping off of the panel. Let it sit for just a second. Don't always do that, but every once in a while I will. And depending on the magazine pages too, some magazines will remove easier than others. Here I'm using Cigar Aficionado, Whiskey Advocate. If I was using Veranda, it would be a little tougher to remove the paper. It's just a thicker paper, or it's the way it's glued to the paper. I don't know, the ink is different. But anyhow, it's generally not too bad on small pieces. Same as before. When you get to the larger paintings, then you start running into a little bit tougher deal. But this is the most fun of the process, is removing that paper and seeing what colors and stuff you've worked to put underneath and see what they look like. It's also a little scary part too, because sometimes it's not exactly what you hope for. So you gotta be open-minded and not judge too much at this point, because in the next steps, after we heat it up and start carving into it and getting the highlights, kind of working on the details, then you start really seeing how the painting's going to turn out. So after I've removed the paper, because the paper will sometimes still leave a haze of a pulp, I like to spray a rag. Usually it's cotton t-shirt type material. Wet it really well, and just I'm buffing it. I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm just wanting to kind of remove any haze of paper that might be left. Look at those colors. Okay, so now I like to hit it with a heat gun. I don't always do this step, but it's a good time to set the ink into the beeswax so you know it's made a good bond. If you do it after you've carved, you got to be a little more careful, just because after you've carved some areas, the wax is easier to heat up and it's more vulnerable to be moved around. So you could really goof up your composition by doing the heat gun too much. So I heat it up and let it cool for a little bit, and then get my carving tools. I'm testing it here to make sure it's cool. It carves different when the wax is warm as opposed to when it's cooler. I kind of like it when the wax is cooled enough to where I get a better feel for carving into those areas. If it's still warm, the tool moves too easily through the wax, of course, because it's more fluid. So I like to let it cool just a little bit before I start doing my carvings. And I'm going to speed this up so you can kind of see the difference in one compared to the other. You just start bringing out details. I mean, that's what the carving does. Not all paintings need much carving. It depends on the subject matter. I really like the honeycombs though to stand out, so that's why I carve them. There have been a few that I've carved and after the fact wished I'd left them alone. On this one here though, I think it really needed it. And I can add the little, with the different tools I use, one of them that's in that cork right there is just almost like a needle, and I can get some really fine lines with that that needle-like thing. So the fuzziness of a bee, that's the tool I use to do that. And what I'm using there that you see is just an awl. I guess it's called an awl, a punch, paper punch, used for bookmaking. It's been a great tool for my carving. I've used that pretty much my whole time in using this process. Then if I'm carving out larger areas, you can see on my right hand there that I have a wire tool laying on the table. Don't use it necessarily in this process, but some paintings where I want some wider areas removed, I'll use that thing. And in the past, I have done some compositions where I removed all the negative area instead of detailing it with honeycomb like this. I've carved away all that area and just left the blonde color of the wood as the background. That worked for a while, then I kind of got tired of it. And yeah, those little, as you're carving out those lines, you're basically pulling up beeswax and some of the ink, and it balls up on the end of the tool that I'm carving with, so that's why I'm grabbing the end of it and removing that so it's not on top of my panel. And I usually carve my initials in the bottom right corner of my paintings. Let's see, we're getting close to the end here, and again I'll finish it up by taking the heat gun, and I usually put it on a lower setting after I've carved into it. Like I said, it's a little easier to move the wax around, so I got to be careful not to blow out an area. The heat gun's it's got forced air, so you got to put it on a low setting at this point so you don't move those pockets of ink around on top of the wax. So we're getting close. And sometimes I will finish one, I get it at least to a point. Oh, forgot I got to put the fuzzy on the bee. Once I get one completed, there are many times I don't like to put a sealer on it right away. I like to hang on to it for a minute just in case I want to go back in and carve in some more details or something doesn't seem right. Because once you put the sealer on it, it's done. There's no going back because you can't reheat it with that sealer on there. It causes problems. So I typically finish one and I'll put it in my studio close by where I can look at it a couple days, and then because I sprayed the sealer on in my garage, weather's got to be right, so I like to try to do several paintings at one time to make it worth my while. Let's see. Apparently I keep going back to these two. Maybe I got them now. Got to put my initials in. Hit with the heat gun. And as for the sealers, I do have another video on my YouTube channel talking about the sealers I use. I think that last one I did, I was using Kamar resin by Krylon, and I've since moved over to using Krylon UV protectant, and I like the gloss. And the difference is, I don't know if it's just the way it cures or the way it responds to being on top of the ink that we're transferring, but it feels like it's a harder surface. And I've played with a dozen other different sealers. Right now, that's my favorite, and I've said in the past that I could change my mind, so nothing's definite. But right now, yeah, the Krylon UV protectant sealer is the product I use, and I'll probably do another video talking about the sealers here before long. But there's also some mediums that you can brush on that you don't have to worry about having a ventilated space, and I'll talk about those too. I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and there's our results. And then here's some other paintings that I've done. You can find more about my work at randylpurcell.com. You can follow me on YouTube, Randy L. Purcell. If you just do a hashtag search, ink on beeswax, you should find me. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.